Hi, welcome to Chapter 12, Psychedelic Drugs. First, let's talk about what the definition of a hallucination is. A hallucination is a perception of something being present that's not actually there and that's actualized with your five senses. So, feeling a strong chill when it's 85 degrees, tasting bitterness when you haven't really eaten anything, smelling rust when there's no signs of any smell anywhere in your vicinity, hearing someone whisper in your ear when it's just you in the house, or seeing shadows or objects when no one else can see them. So, a hallucination is a perception of something that involves your five senses that isn't actually present. This chapter, we're talking about psychedelic drugs, where the main pharmacological effect is hallucinations. Psychedelic drugs are classified into three categories: hallucinogens, mixed stimulants, psychedelics, and dissociative anesthetics. These drugs all have hallucinogenic effects, but LSD is the most representative of this category. And then there's psilocybin, mescaline, and dimethyltryptamine. With almost every class of drugs we've talked about so far, there typically are natural and synthetic combination, and synthetic, which is completely lab created. Lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD, which is also called acid, is part natural and part synthetic. The natural primary ingredient is lysergic acid, and lysergic acid is actually found in ergot, which is a fungus which grows on rye and wheat. Both lysergic acid and LSD are Schedule 1, which means that they have high abuse potential and zero medical use. And then there are synthetic hallucinogens, named N-bomb is one of them, which causes similar effects to other hallucinogens, which is the point, right? Because they want to create drugs that can mimic the real thing to be able to mass produce and keep costs low. And another sneaky reason I've mentioned before is that these drug creators try to create drugs that don't fit under the current drug schedule definition of drugs so that they have less of a chance of being convicted of anything. The schedule of drugs is like a dictionary, a rule book. If the drug being created doesn't fall into any of the definitions in that book, it's harder to pin a crime on them versus if they were to use ingredients that are already defined as illegal. So another synthetic hallucinogen is dextromethorphan, which is actually found in Robitussin. It's, the cough syrup. So large doses can actually create psychedelic effects. So someone who is drinking excessive amounts to get high is called robo-tripping. And that person may feel like they're not in their body, be in a trance, have problems with talking clearly, having auditory and visual hallucinations, and of course also the not so desired effects. So according to Mount Sinai, New York, they include dizziness, balance, nausea, heart palpitations, seizures, impaired vision, labored breathing, and even coma. So don't try this at home, kids. Then we have the completely natural hallucinogens, which are psilocybin and mescaline. They both produce visual hallucinations. While these are both Schedule 1 and illegal, the Native American Church is actually an exception. They are authorized to possess and use mescaline for religious practices. Then we have dimethyltryptamine, which is DMT, and salvia. Again, these are both extracted from plants, which is why they are natural. They're both Schedule 1. The last I checked, the plant Psychotria viridis is not illegal to own, but it's illegal to own the seed because the seed contains DMT. So if you own this plant, make sure the seeds don't fall off. Here's your requested stop and check. You know who I'm talking about. I'm talking to you, the one who requested it. Slide 10. LSD is taken orally. Usually small drops are put onto like small squares of paper or stamps or anything porous enough to hold the chemical so that it can be licked off. It usually takes about 60 minutes to be fully absorbed. It's metabolized in the liver, and the effects can last up to about 12 hours. However, it may still be detectable in the body after 24 hours. LSD's physical structure resembles serotonin's. Therefore, LSD acts on serotonin receptors. LSD doesn't increase serotonin release. They work as serotonin. So they're kind of like serotonin imposters. When LSD binds to the 5-HT2A receptors, this action increases activity of glutamate and GABA, which results in more defined sensory info. So our brains typically filters out excessive information so we don't get overwhelmed, but this process is like opening the floodgates. Everything's enhanced and refined. Increased glutamate release also causes increased activity in the prefrontal cortex, where we do our thinking, and in the temporal medial cortex, where our visual memory and spatial cognition is. MDMA changes the flow of serotonin. It stops serotonin from traveling into storage vesicles and causes the reversal of serotonin transporters. So, MDMA causes increase in serotonin levels, which leads to increased activation of serotonin receptors. As far as dopamine, it causes similar effects as with serotonin, though it has to do more work to get the same effect with dopamine. Chronic uses of MDMA can lead to severe damage to serotonin neurons, which means that everything serotonin is responsible for, such as sleep, memory, sex drive, mood, appetite, and many more, can be negatively impacted. I'll let you go through the effects on your own. We'll skip to slide 26. The default mode network are areas of our brain that is responsible for conscious activities like daydreaming, introspection, and episodic memory processing and ruminating. The DMN is always active, but when we're engaged in a mental task, this network is on standby mode. When we stop engaging in that task, we default back to DMN. So when you're enthralled in reading a book, working on a hobby, playing a game, or having a thoughtful conversation with someone, the default network is on standby. So when you are enthralled in that task, you are not likely to daydream. However, neurodivergent ADHDers, brain trauma folks, their DMN is more active, which is why they're more likely to daydream during a task. Bounces back and forth. That is for a whole nother class though. So when we finally disengage from that mental task that we were doing, the DMN comes off of standby and does its thing. When psychedelics are used, the DMN reduces in activity. So the DMN is overactive in people with depression and anxiety. This is because it's responsible for things like introspection and memories for personal experiences. People with depression and anxiety tend to ruminate or obsess over things that they experienced, their bad experiences. So if psychedelics reduce activity in the DMN, then they would, in theory, reduce depression and anxiety. So here's another angle. The DMN has to do with the sense of self. Psychedelics pretty much remove that sense of self from the scenario and allows your brain to think objectively. So let's say Johnny represents depression and anxiety. Depression and anxiety are subjective experiences. Not everyone will have them or experience them the same. Mary represents the psychedelic. She's like the therapist. Her approach is objective and is there to help you open up. So that's what psychedelics are reported to help do. Of course, more research has to be done regarding psychedelics being used for therapy and for helping people have a deeper connection or be in deeper thought. Overall, the effects of psychedelics are very different from the effects of psychostimulant drugs and cannabis. So it's not like they get high as they would when they take stimulants or cannabis. It's like a different kind of a deeper level of thought. Someone taking a normal dose of LSD may experience very small increases in heart rate, pupil diameter, minor dizziness, mild nausea, or stomach ache. Remember Albert Hofmann, the chemist who accidentally discovered LSD? Well, he took 0.25 milligrams, which was a high enough dose to cause physiological and hallucinogenic subjective effects, but a safe enough dosage that didn't cause like a hangover. So you should read about his experience on 381. 14 milligrams is considered lethal, which means that a user can actually experience the effects of LSD before they take enough to unalive them. So it's not likely someone is going to OD from LSD because they can just take like 0.25, be high enough for their satisfaction, and still be alive the next day. So at 14 milligrams, it's not even necessary to even go that high. So even if you took 1 milligram, you're not going to die from it. To review, a hallucination is a stimulus that is imagined with our senses. So something that is imagined by touch, smell, sight, or sound. Things that don't actually exist, but we perceive them to be there. Here they differentiate hallucinations by true and pseudo. Pseudo hallucination is defined as altered perception of things that are real. So with true hallucinations, the stimuli doesn't exist at all. With pseudo hallucinations, the stimuli exists, but it's distorted in some type of way. So true hallucination would be like Johnny sees a man standing in front of him, but no one else sees that man. Pseudo hallucination would be like Mary seeing a man, but his figure looks like it's melting. Or Mary hallucinating that her mushroom pillow is dancing around wearing a big hat and dress. So the top of the mushroom would be the hat. Someone having a good trip might experience pleasant sensory distortions and pseudo hallucinations. A dancing mushroom is kind of funny, right? So that would be considered a good trip. A bad trip might be disturbing. True hallucinations, psychotic episodes, negative emotional states, altered perceptions of time, and out of body experience. Another term you should know is synesthesia. It's experiencing sensory stimuli in an incorrect way. So basically, somebody would be tasting words, hearing colors, seeing smells. This picture would distorted, or somebody being on acid might experience. They see colors and things look like kaleidoscope colors. Maybe this is a little ball, but because they're on acid, their visual perception is distorted. Even though so far it sounds like psychedelics are harmless, people have jumped off buildings and believed that they could fly or walked into oncoming traffic. It's not that harmless, or else it would be legal. Other effects of LSD include flashbacks from previous use or recurring unpleasant memories from a hallucinogenic experience. Mixed stimulant psychedelic drugs cause psychostimulant effects and hallucinations. So you have both. You have the stimulant effects, then you have the psychedelic hallucinations. So methylene dioxide methamphetamine, try saying that fast 3 times. This is MDMA, and it shares a similar structure with amphetamine, so it will cause stimulant effects. MDMA causes people to be touchier and have enhanced empathy. Users become friendlier, like they're more in touch with their emotions. That you might also know MDMA as ecstasy. However, ecstasy doesn't always refer to MDMA, but typically on the street, when people say X or ecstasy, they're referring to MDMA. MDMA is usually in tablet form. It's absorbed in the GI tract, reaches its peak in about 2 hours. That's not to say that the user doesn't feel the effects sooner, it just peaks at about 2 hours. Again, with anything you take orally, many factors influence absorption. Someone's weight, what's in their stomach, tolerance, genetics, things like that. The elimination half-life is approximately 9 hours, and it can stay in the body 24 plus hours. Okay, it's metabolized by the liver, by these 2 enzymes. One of these enzymes, the CYP1A2, converts MDMA to methylene dioxide amphetamine, MDA. I know the full chemical name looks like MDMA. The only thing that's missing from here is the meth part. So this is methylene dioxyamphetamine. MDMA is methylene dioxymethamphetamine. Rebound effects of MDMA use normally happens after 24 hours from the time of use and primarily consists of depression and lethargy. This is like the come down. And this is because the dopamine and serotonin stores are emptied out. The MDMA caused a crazy increase in these neurotransmitters, and now they're depleted. And replenishing these stores would require new serotonin and dopamine to synthesize, and that can take several days. So, Shulgin, dude that hyped MDMA up, reported that after about 7 uses, the positive effects declined, meaning that the person has to build up a tolerance. It's like if you're a coffee, energy, beverage drinker, or if you take any form of caffeine, if you haven't had it for a few days, you might notice that when you do drink it, it's a lot stronger. But then if you drink it for several consecutive days, you eventually feel like it's not working, right? Because you're used to it, your body has built up a tolerance. For those of you who don't take caffeine, it's like eating something delicious that you haven't eaten in a long time. The first couple of bites are going to be delicious, right? Then you have 5 or 6 more, and it's not that exciting anymore. It's because your brain got used to it, so it stopped firing excitatory signals. In other words, now that your brain has become used to something, it needs more of the substance to fire signals to lead to that good feeling. And this is why people who use MDMA regularly take like 10 to 20 pills in one occasion, not all in one shot, rather like in one night, or if they're at a party or a concert or something. Users have also reported that MDMA has gotten weaker over time, meaning it's less potent, which could be another reason why they're taking more. Withdrawal. The book might be a little bit confusing when it talks about withdrawal, so I'll just sum it up for you. Ultimately, MDMA users do experience withdrawal, such as cravings, anxiety, depression, irritability, fatigue, memory problems, experience paranoia, and more. It's a little bit different than the traditional withdrawals, but it's still considered withdrawals. Dissociative anesthetics are sedative, pain relieving drugs that produce feelings of disconnectedness from the body and have depressant and stimulant effects. These include PCP and ketamine. So, phencyclidine, PCP, also called angel dust, comes in pill, powder, and liquid form. Clandestine laboratories, which are secret illegal labs, make the most PCP. Ketamine, known as Special K, is used as an anesthetic for animals. It's also being tested for treatment for antidepressant or as an antidepressant. The DEA labeled PCP and ketamine as Schedule II drugs because they both have high abuse potential and have legitimate medical uses. This way, it leaves the door open for research into further uses of these drugs. So, like if they make it Schedule 1, then it's harder for researchers to experiment, right? Because it's illegal. So, it's hard to get funding and clearance and possession. Obviously, if it's a Schedule 1, they wouldn't be able to possess it. So, if it's Schedule 2, it's like, okay, it still has high abuse potential, but it also has some medicinal uses. Having it as Schedule 2 makes it safer for them to go forward what they need to do. So everything here is pretty straightforward. I'm going to let you go through these slides yourself. Kind of boring if I go over them. Moving on to the last slide. As far as treatment, according to several sources, including the National Institute of Drug Abuse, CBT is the most effective because it can help the user with identifying non-adaptive thinking and behaviors and replacing them with more adaptive thinking and behaviors, and also develop coping strategies so they can deal with life stressors and other methods instead of using drugs. Support groups are also very helpful for that person to gain peer support. And that's all for this chapter. Talk to you guys later.